Jake Matthews wiped the sweat from his forehead as he leaned against the wooden fence post. The Texas sun was merciless this July afternoon, beating down on the sprawling Sunset Ridge Ranch like a hammer on an anvil. He had been working on this ranch for 3 years now, and every day felt the same. Wake up before dawn, tend to the cattle, fix whatever was broken, and collapse into bed exhausted. At 28, he sometimes wondered if this was all life had to offer him. The ranch belonged to William Hartley, a man who had built his fortune from nothing. Hartley was fair but demanding, expecting perfection from his workers. Jake respected him, even if he found the old man intimidating. What Jake didn't expect was that Hartley's daughter would be coming home from college that summer. Elena Hartley stepped out of her silver sedan, her designer boots crunching on the gravel driveway. She had graduated from Columbia University with a degree in business administration, and her father expected her to help modernize the ranch operations. At 25, she was confident, intelligent, and completely out of place in the rural setting she had grown up in but left behind years ago. Jake was repairing a gate near the main house when he first saw her. She was talking on her phone, gesturing with her free hand as she spoke in rapid sentences about quarterly reports and market analysis. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and she wore a crisp white blouse that somehow remained spotless despite the dusty environment. Their first interaction came 2 days later. Jake was leading a group of new ranch hands through their morning duties when Elena approached. She had a clipboard in her hands and wore a determined expression that Jake had learned to recognize in people who thought they knew better than those who actually did the work. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being listened to. "I need to speak with whoever is in charge of the livestock rotation schedule." Jake removed his hat and ran his fingers through his hair. "That would be me, miss. Jake Matthews." Elena's eyes swept over him, taking in his worn jeans, dusty boots, and sun-weathered hands. "I've been reviewing the ranch's efficiency reports, and I believe we can increase productivity by 30% if we implement a more systematic approach to grazing patterns." Jake felt his jaw tighten. He had been managing the cattle for years, learning from men who had decades of experience. The current system worked well, keeping the animals healthy and the pastures in good condition. "With respect, Miss Hartley, the system we have in place takes into account factors that might not show up in reports. Weather patterns, soil conditions, the individual needs of different herds." "I understand you have experience," Elena replied, her tone suggesting she thought his experience was limited. "But data-driven decisions consistently outperform intuition-based management. I have studies that prove systematic rotation increases both animal health and land sustainability." Jake's face flushed. He heard her words as condescension, a college graduate telling him that his years of hands-on work meant nothing compared to her books and theories. "Miss, I don't need studies to tell me what I can see with my own eyes. These cattle are healthy, the land is good, and we haven't lost a single head to poor management in the 3 years I've been doing this job." Elena felt her own frustration rising. She hadn't meant to dismiss his experience, but she could see he was being defensive about change. In business school, she had learned that resistance to innovation was often the biggest obstacle to improvement. "I'm not questioning your dedication. I'm suggesting that we can build on what you've accomplished by incorporating proven methodologies." But Jake didn't hear it that way. To him, her words sounded like polite corporate speak for "you don't know what you're doing." He had encountered this attitude before from people who thought a college degree made them experts in everything. "I appreciate your education, Miss Hartley, but some things can't be learned from textbooks." The conversation ended awkwardly, with both of them walking away frustrated. Jake returned to his work, muttering about city folk who thought they could waltz onto a ranch and fix everything. Elena went back to the house, wondering why the ranch hands seemed so resistant to obviously beneficial changes. Over the following weeks, their interactions became increasingly tense. Elena would propose modifications to various ranch operations based on her research and analysis. Jake would resist these changes, believing she was trying to fix something that wasn't broken. Each conversation reinforced their negative impressions of each other. Elena began to see Jake as stubborn and backwards, unwilling to consider new ideas simply because they came from someone younger and more educated. She complained to her father that the ranch foreman was blocking necessary improvements out of pride and ignorance. Jake, meanwhile, viewed Elena as another privileged college graduate who thought her degree made her an instant expert. He told his fellow workers that the boss's daughter was trying to turn a working ranch into some kind of academic experiment. The tension came to a head on a particularly hot Thursday in August. Elena had been working on a comprehensive proposal to restructure the ranch's operations, complete with projected cost savings and efficiency improvements. She had spent weeks gathering data, creating charts, and preparing a presentation that she believed would demonstrate the value of her ideas. She found Jake near the equipment barn, where he was teaching a new ranch hand how to properly maintain a tractor engine. She waited until he finished his explanation before approaching with her folder of documents. "Jake, I'd like to go over some proposals with you," she said, trying to keep her voice neutral and professional. Jake looked up from the engine, his hands black with grease. "More changes?" "Improvements," Elena corrected. "I've identified several areas where we can increase efficiency without compromising quality." Jake wiped his hands on a rag and turned to face her fully. "Miss Hartley, I need to be straight with you. This ranch has been successful for decades. Your father built something good here. Maybe instead of trying to change everything, you should try to understand why it works the way it does." Elena felt her patience finally snap. "I have been trying to understand. I've spent weeks studying every aspect of this operation. I've researched best practices, analyzed our costs, and identified clear opportunities for improvement. But every time I try to discuss these ideas with you, you dismiss them without even listening." "Because they're based on theory instead of reality," Jake shot back. "You can't run a ranch from a spreadsheet. Animals aren't numbers. Weather doesn't follow your projections. This work requires experience and instinct, things you can't learn in a classroom. And you can't improve anything if you're not willing to consider new approaches," Elena retorted. "Experience is valuable, but it's not the only source of knowledge. There are ranchers all over the country using innovative methods to increase their success. Why are you so afraid of change?" "I'm not afraid of change," Jake said, his voice rising slightly. "I'm afraid of changes that could hurt the animals or damage the land because someone with a business degree thinks she knows better than people who have been doing this work their whole lives." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Elena felt as though Jake had just told her that her education was worthless, that she had no right to contribute to her family's business. Jake heard his own words and realized he had let his frustration get the better of him, but he couldn't take them back now. "Fine," Elena said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "I'll stay out of your way. You can keep doing things exactly the same way they've always been done." She turned and walked away, leaving Jake standing by the tractor feeling like he had won an argument but lost something more important. He couldn't quite put his finger on what that something was, but he felt the absence of it as he watched her retreating figure. That evening, as Jake sat on the porch of his small cabin on the ranch property, he found himself thinking about the conversation. He had been so focused on defending his methods that he hadn't really listened to what Elena was trying to say. He knew she was intelligent and dedicated, even if he disagreed with her approach. But something about her confidence and education made him feel defensive, like she was judging him and finding him lacking. Meanwhile, Elena sat in her childhood bedroom, staring at her laptop screen full of research and proposals that she now realized no one wanted to hear. She had come home excited to contribute to the family business, to use her education to help the ranch thrive. Instead, she felt like an outsider in her own home, dismissed by people who saw her as nothing more than a privileged college girl playing at ranch work. Both of them went to bed that night frustrated and hurt, neither understanding how their good intentions had created such conflict. Neither could see that their miscommunication was rooted in deeper fears and insecurities that had nothing to do with cattle management or business efficiency. The summer heat seemed to press down on the ranch like a weight, making everyone irritable and short-tempered. The cattle sought shade wherever they could find it, and the ranch hands moved slowly through their tasks, conserving energy for the cooler evening hours. It was during this oppressive weather that everything would change, though neither Jake nor Elena could have predicted how one night would transform both their lives forever. The storm hit without warning on a Tuesday night in late August. What had been a clear evening sky suddenly filled with massive black clouds that rolled across the horizon like an advancing army. Jake was in the middle of his final rounds, checking on the cattle in the far pastures, when the first drops of rain began to fall. By the time he realized the severity of the approaching weather, it was too late to make it back to the main buildings. The rain came down in sheets, driven by winds that howled across the open range. Lightning split the sky every few seconds, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the very ground beneath his feet. Jake's horse, a reliable mare named Rosie, became increasingly agitated as the storm intensified. He guided her toward an old line cabin that sat about 2 miles from the main ranch house. The cabin had been built decades ago as shelter for ranch hands working the distant sections of the property. It was basic but sturdy, with a tin roof and solid wooden walls that could withstand the harsh Texas weather. As he approached the cabin through the driving rain, Jake was surprised to see a light flickering in the window. Someone was already there. He dismounted quickly and led Rosie to the small stable attached to the side of the building. The door to the cabin opened just as he finished securing his horse. Elena stood silhouetted in the doorway, holding a battery-powered lantern. Her hair was damp and disheveled, and she was wearing ranch clothes instead of her usual business attire. "Jake? What are you doing out here?" "Could ask you the same question," Jake replied, water dripping from his hat brim as he stepped onto the covered porch. "This storm came out of nowhere." "I was checking on the equipment in Sector 7, Elena explained, stepping aside to let him enter. "My father asked me to inventory the maintenance supplies stored out here. I got caught when the weather turned." Jake removed his hat and jacket, hanging them on pegs by the door. The cabin was small, perhaps 12 feet by 16 feet, with a stone fireplace, a simple table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bunk bed. Elena had managed to get a fire started, and the warm light danced across the log walls. "How long have you been here?" Jake asked, trying to keep the conversation neutral. They hadn't spoken much since their argument weeks ago, maintaining a polite but distant relationship when their work required interaction. "About an hour," Elena replied, returning to her seat at the table where she had spreadsheets and inventory lists spread out. "I was hoping the storm would pass quickly, but it looks like it's settling in for the night." As if to emphasize her point, a particularly violent gust of wind rattled the windows, and the rain drummed even harder against the roof. Jake walked to the window and peered out into the darkness. Visibility was near zero, and the lightning revealed a landscape transformed by the torrential downpour. "We're not going anywhere tonight," he said, turning back to face Elena. "The creek between here and the main ranch will be flooding by now. Even if it wasn't, riding in this would be suicide." Elena felt a knot form in her stomach. Being trapped in a small cabin with Jake for an entire night was not something she had anticipated. The tension between them had made every interaction uncomfortable, and the thought of spending hours in such close quarters filled her with dread. "There's only one bed," she said, stating the obvious. Jake glanced at the narrow bunk and then at the wooden floor. "I'll take the floor." "You take the bed." "You don't have to do that. This is just as much your emergency as mine." "It's fine," Jake replied, already moving toward the fireplace to add another log. "I've slept in worse places." They settled into an awkward silence, Elena returning to her paperwork while Jake tended the fire. The storm raged outside, creating an intimate atmosphere that neither of them wanted to acknowledge. The cabin felt even smaller with both of them in it, and every movement seemed amplified in the confined space. After an hour of uncomfortable quiet, broken only by the sounds of the storm, Elena finally spoke. "Jake, can I ask you something?" He looked up from where he was arranging his jacket into a makeshift pillow. "Sure. When I suggest changes to ranch operations, do you think I'm trying to criticize your work?" The question caught Jake off guard. He had expected small talk about the weather or practical discussions about their situation. Instead, Elena was addressing the elephant in the room directly. "Sometimes," he answered honestly, sitting down in the chair across from her. "It feels like you think everything we're doing is wrong or outdated." Elena set down her pen and looked at him directly for the first time in weeks. "That's not what I mean at all. I think you're incredibly good at what you do. The ranch runs smoothly, the animals are healthy, and the operation is profitable. I'm not trying to fix problems. I'm trying to find opportunities. Opportunities for what? To make good things even better, Elena said, her voice carrying a sincerity that Jake hadn't heard before. To help the ranch grow and adapt to changing markets. To ensure it's still thriving when my father retires and beyond. Jake studied her face in the firelight. Without the professional mask she usually wore, she looked younger and more vulnerable. Why didn't you say that before? I thought I was saying that, Elena replied with a slight smile. I guess I'm not as good at communication as I thought. Makes two of us, Jake admitted. I've been defensive because I thought you were trying to prove that everything I know is worthless compared to what you learned in college. Your knowledge isn't worthless. It's invaluable. But that doesn't mean there isn't room for new approaches too. Jake leaned back in his chair, feeling something shift between them. You know, I never asked about your ideas because I was afraid they'd actually be better than what I was doing. And then, what would that say about me? Elena was quiet for a moment, processing his admission. I never considered that perspective. I was so focused on proving that my education was relevant to ranch work that I didn't think about how my suggestions might make you feel. It's not your fault, Jake said. I should have been more open-minded. Your father didn't hire me to resist change. He hired me to help the ranch succeed. The conversation continued as the storm raged outside. For the first time, they talked about their backgrounds, their motivations, and their genuine concerns about the ranch's future. Jake learned that Elena had grown up feeling disconnected from the ranch, watching her father work constantly while she excelled in school but felt like she had no practical contribution to make to the family business. Elena discovered that Jake had grown up on a small farm that his family lost when he was 16 due to poor financial management and bad luck with weather. Working on the Sunset Ridge Ranch wasn't just a job for him, it was his chance to be part of something stable and successful. I should have told you about my background, Jake said as the fire burned lower. Might have helped you understand why I get so protective of the way things are done here. And I should have asked about your experience instead of assuming you'd be interested in hearing about mine, Elena replied. I spent so much time preparing to prove myself that I forgot to actually listen. As the night wore on, their conversation evolved from explanations and apologies to genuine curiosity about each other's perspectives. Jake found himself fascinated by Elena's analytical mind and her genuine passion for making the ranch more successful. Elena discovered that Jake's practical knowledge was far more sophisticated than she had realized, encompassing everything from animal psychology to soil science to weather prediction. You know what's funny? Elena said as they prepared makeshift sleeping arrangements around midnight. We're both trying to accomplish the same thing. We just approach it differently. How do you figure? You want to protect the ranch by maintaining the things that work well. I want to protect it by helping it adapt to future challenges. Neither approach is wrong. Jake considered this as he arranged blankets on the floor near the fireplace. Maybe the best approach is combining both. I'd like that, Elena said, settling onto the narrow bunk. If you're willing to try. I'm willing, Jake replied, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was agreeing to beyond giving Elena's ideas a fair hearing. The storm began to subside around 2 a.m, the thunder moving off into the distance and the rain settling into a steady but manageable pattern. Both of them were exhausted, but sleep came slowly in the unfamiliar setting. Jake lay on the hard floor, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the evening's conversation. He felt lighter somehow, as if a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying had been lifted from his shoulders. For weeks, he had been dreading Elena's presence on the ranch, expecting every interaction to be a battle. Now he found himself curious about her ideas and impressed by her genuine commitment to the ranch's success. Elena curled up on the narrow bunk, pulling the thin blanket around her shoulders. She felt relieved and hopeful in a way she hadn't since arriving home from college. For the first time, she believed she might actually be able to contribute meaningfully to the family business. More than that, she felt like she had found an ally instead of an adversary in Jake. Neither of them could sleep easily in the cramped conditions, but both were comfortable with the new understanding between them. The storm that had trapped them together had also washed away the misunderstandings and defensive barriers that had kept them apart. As dawn approached and the last of the rain clouds moved on, Jake and Elena had no idea that their night of honest conversation was only the beginning of a transformation that would change not just their working relationship, but their entire lives. The morning after the storm dawned clear and bright, with the kind of crisp air that follows a violent weather system. Jake woke first, his body stiff from sleeping on the wooden floor, but his mind clearer than it had been in weeks. Elena was still sleeping peacefully on the narrow bunk, her face relaxed in a way he had never seen during their previous encounters. He quietly rebuilt the fire and put water on to heat for coffee, using supplies that were kept stocked in the line cabin for emergencies. The simple domestic task felt strangely comfortable, and he found himself moving carefully to avoid waking Elena. When she finally stirred around 7 in the morning, the cabin was warm and filled with the smell of brewing coffee. "Good morning," Elena said, sitting up and running her fingers through her tangled hair. "How long have you been awake?" "About an hour," Jake replied, handing her a steaming mug. "I figured we could head back after breakfast. The storm's passed, and the sun will dry things out pretty quickly." They ate a simple meal of canned beans and crackers, talking easily about practical matters like the condition of the trails and the likely impact of the rain on the ranch operations. The awkwardness that had defined their previous interactions was gone, replaced by a comfortable familiarity that surprised them both. The ride back to the main ranch took twice as long as usual due to muddy conditions and fallen branches, but neither of them minded the slow pace. They used the time to continue their conversation from the night before, discussing Elena's ideas for ranch improvements with a level of detail and mutual respect that would have been impossible just days earlier. "I've been thinking about your livestock rotation proposal," Jake said as they navigated around a large puddle. "There might be something to it, especially in the south pastures where we've been seeing some overgrazing." Elena looked at him with surprise. "Really? I thought you were completely opposed to changing the current system." "I was opposed to changing a system I thought was working perfectly," Jake corrected. "But you're right that there's always room for improvement. And, honestly, I've noticed some areas where the grass isn't recovering as well as it used to." They spent the rest of the ride developing a plan to test Elena's rotation schedule on a small section of the ranch. Jake would provide practical insights about the specific needs of the land and animals, while Elena would track data to measure the results. It would be a true collaboration, combining their different areas of expertise. When they finally reached the main ranch house, William Hartley was waiting on the front porch with barely contained anxiety. He had spent the night worrying about his daughter and his foreman, both caught in the unexpected storm. "Thank God you're both safe," he said, embracing Elena and shaking Jake's hand firmly. "I was about to send out a search party. We took shelter in the old line cabin," Elena explained. "We're fine, just tired and muddy." William studied their faces, noting something different in the way they stood near each other and spoke about their experience. The tension that had been obvious for weeks seemed to have disappeared entirely. Over the following days, Jake and Elena began working together in earnest. They started with small projects, testing Elena's ideas on limited scales while Jake provided guidance based on his practical experience. The results were immediately positive, not just in terms of ranch efficiency but in the working relationship between them. Other ranch hands noticed the change immediately. Where before there had been uncomfortable silences and obvious tension whenever Jake and Elena were in the same area, now there was easy collaboration and frequent discussion. Maria Santos, the ranch's head cook, commented to her husband that it was like watching two different people than the ones who had been barely speaking just a week ago. "They're good for each other," she observed while preparing lunch for the crew. "She makes him think bigger, and he keeps her grounded in reality." The collaboration between Jake and Elena quickly expanded beyond the initial livestock rotation project. Elena's analytical skills proved invaluable for identifying inefficiencies that Jake's practical eye had missed, while Jake's deep understanding of the land and animals prevented Elena from implementing changes that looked good on paper but wouldn't work in practice. Their days began to follow a new rhythm. They would meet each morning over coffee to discuss the day's priorities and compare notes from the previous day's work. Jake would take Elena through the practical aspects of ranch operations, explaining the reasoning behind traditional methods and pointing out subtle signs that indicated the health and happiness of the animals. Elena, in turn, showed Jake how to use data analysis tools to track patterns and identify trends that weren't obvious from day-to-day observation. She taught him about market analysis, helping him understand how external factors affected the ranch's profitability and long-term viability. "I never realized how much the price of beef fluctuates based on things happening thousands of miles away," Jake said one afternoon as Elena showed him commodity market reports on her laptop. "And I never understood how much the weather patterns from 5 years ago still affect which pastures are most productive today," Elena replied, looking up from a soil quality chart that Jake had helped her interpret. Their collaboration was producing measurable results. The test area where they had implemented Elena's rotation schedule showed improved grass growth within just 2 weeks. A water management system that combined Elena's research with Jake's knowledge of the land's natural drainage patterns had reduced water waste by 20% while ensuring adequate supply for all the livestock. William Hartley watched these developments with growing satisfaction. He had hoped that Elena would find a way to contribute to the ranch operation, but he hadn't expected such dramatic improvements so quickly. More importantly, he hadn't expected his daughter and his foreman to develop such an effective working partnership. But, as the weeks passed, William began to notice something that went beyond professional collaboration. He saw the way Jake's face lit up when Elena approached with a new idea. He observed how Elena always seemed to find excuses to spend time in whatever area of the ranch Jake was working. Their body language had changed completely, from the defensive postures of their early encounters to an easy intimacy that spoke of genuine affection and respect. The other ranch hands noticed it too. Tommy Rodriguez, who had worked alongside Jake for 2 years, started teasing him about his sudden interest in data analysis and market reports. "Since when do you care about quarterly projections?" Tommy asked one evening as Jake studied spreadsheets on Elena's laptop. "Since I realized they actually affect our work," Jake replied, not looking up from the screen. "If we know beef prices are likely to drop next spring, we can adjust our selling schedule to maximize profits." "Aha," Tommy said with a knowing grin. "And I suppose it has nothing to do with the fact that Elena is the one explaining these projections to you." Jake felt his face flush, but he couldn't deny that Tommy had a point. Somewhere along the way, his interest in Elena's ideas had become inseparable from his interest in Elena herself. He looked forward to their morning meetings not just because they were productive, but because he enjoyed her company. He found himself staying late to help with her projects not just because they were beneficial to the ranch, but because he didn't want their time together to end. Elena was experiencing similar feelings but was less sure how to interpret them. She had always been focused on academic and professional achievement, with little time for romantic relationships. The connection she felt with Jake was unlike anything she had experienced before. It was built on mutual respect and shared goals, but it was evolving into something deeper and more personal. The situation came to a head on a Saturday evening in late September. Elena had been working on a comprehensive report summarizing all the improvements they had implemented over the past month, complete with projected benefits and recommendations for future expansion. She was in the ranch office, surrounded by charts and graphs, when Jake knocked on the door. "Mind if I come in?" he asked, holding 2 cups of Maria's famous hot chocolate. "Please," Elena said, grateful for the interruption. "I've been staring at these numbers so long they're starting to blur together." Jake set 1 cup next to her and took a seat in the chair opposite her desk. "What's the verdict? Are we making a difference?" "More than I hoped for," Elena said, turning her laptop screen so he could see the summary. "Productivity is up 18%, costs are down 12%, and animal health indicators have improved across all metrics." Jake whistled low. "Your father's going to be pleased." "Our father's going to be pleased," Elena corrected. "This isn't my success alone. None of these improvements would have worked without your knowledge and support." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their hot chocolate and reviewing the data that represented weeks of hard work and collaboration. The office was quiet, with only the sound of crickets outside and the distant lowing of cattle settling in for the night. "Elena," Jake said finally, his voice carrying a hesitation that she had never heard before. "Can I ask you something personal?" She looked up from her screen, noting the serious expression on his face. Of course. What happens when this project is finished? I mean, you've proved that your ideas work. Your father knows you can contribute to the ranch operation. Do you stay, or do you go back to the corporate world? Elena was quiet for a long moment, considering the question that she had been avoiding thinking about. When she had come home for the summer, her plan had been to help with some modernization projects and, then, return to the business world where her skills would be more traditionally valued. But, somewhere along the way, that plan had become much less appealing. I don't know, she said honestly. A month ago, I would have said I'd definitely go back to the corporate world. This was supposed to be a temporary project to help my father. But now? Jake prompted gently. Now I'm not sure I want to leave, Elena admitted. I love this work. I love seeing the direct results of our efforts. I love working with the land and the animals instead of just numbers on a screen. Jake felt his heart rate increase. And, is that the only reason you want to stay? Elena met his eyes directly, seeing the hope and vulnerability in his expression. She realized that this was a moment that would define not just their working relationship, but their personal future as well. No, she said quietly. It's not the only reason. The admission hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and uncertainty. Both of them knew that they had reached a turning point, not just in their professional collaboration but in their personal lives. The storm that had brought them together in the line cabin had been followed by weeks of growing trust and affection, but neither had been willing to acknowledge the romantic feelings that were developing alongside their working partnership. Jake stood up slowly and walked around the desk to where Elena sat. She turned in her chair to face him, her heart beating so loudly she was sure he could hear it. Elena, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I need to tell you something. This partnership we have, it's the best thing that's happened to me in years. You've made me better at my job, better at thinking about the future, just better in general. But, somewhere along the way, it became about more than work. Elena stood up as well, closing the distance between them until they were standing just inches apart. I feel the same way, she whispered. I came here thinking I needed to prove something to my father and to myself. Instead, I found something I didn't even know I was looking for. Jake reached up to touch her face gently, his calloused fingers tracing the line of her cheek. Are you sure? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back to just being colleagues. Elena leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. I don't want to go back. I want to move forward, together. When Jake kissed her, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, the logical conclusion to weeks of growing emotional intimacy. It was gentle and sweet, full of promise for the future they might build together. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. So what happens now? Elena asked, her hands resting on Jake's chest. Now we figure out how to make this work, Jake replied, pulling her closer. The ranch, the partnership, us. All of it. Outside the office window, the Texas sky was filled with stars, and the ranch settled into the peaceful quiet of evening. Neither Jake nor Elena could have predicted that a misunderstanding about livestock rotation would lead to the kind of love that changes everything, but, as they stood holding each other in the lamplight, both of them knew that their lives had been transformed completely. The storm that had trapped them together had been just the beginning. The real transformation had happened slowly, day by day, as they learned to trust each other and discovered that their differences made them stronger rather than weaker. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but they would face them together, as partners in every sense of the word. 6 months later, the Sunset Ridge Ranch had transformed into something that exceeded even William Hartley's ambitious dreams. The combination of Jake's practical expertise and Elena's analytical approach had created a model of modern ranch management that was attracting attention from agricultural colleges and industry publications across the state. The changes were visible everywhere. The pastures showed the healthy green of well-managed grazing rotation. New water systems delivered precisely measured amounts to each section based on seasonal needs and weather patterns. The cattle were healthier and more productive than they had ever been, and the ranch's profit margins had increased by 35%. But the most significant transformation was in the people who had made it all possible. Jake and Elena had found a working rhythm that made their individual strengths complement each other perfectly. More importantly, their personal relationship had deepened into something neither had expected to find on a Texas ranch. Jake had proposed on a crisp December morning, offering Elena a simple diamond ring as they stood watching the sunrise over the eastern pastures. She had said yes without hesitation, knowing that her future was inextricably linked to this land, this work, and this man who had shown her what true partnership meant. Their engagement party had been held in the main barn, decorated with white lights and wildflowers by Maria Santos and the other ranch wives. Cowboys and college friends mingled over barbecue and beer, celebrating a union that represented more than just two people finding love. It was the merging of tradition and innovation, of old ways and new thinking. William Hartley had given a toast that brought tears to Elena's eyes. "I always hoped my daughter would find her place on this ranch," he had said, raising his glass to the assembled crowd. "I never imagined she would also find a way to make it better than I ever dreamed possible. Jake and Elena, you've shown us that the future doesn't have to abandon the past. It can build on it." The wedding was planned for the following spring, but their life together had already begun in earnest. Elena had moved into Jake's cabin, which they were gradually expanding to accommodate their shared life and work. Every evening, they would sit on the porch reviewing the day's accomplishments and planning for tomorrow's challenges. Their different backgrounds had become a source of strength rather than conflict. When equipment manufacturers tried to sell them expensive new technology, Elena's business education helped them evaluate the real costs and benefits, while Jake's practical experience determined whether the improvements would actually work under ranch conditions. When market fluctuations threatened to reduce profits, Jake's deep understanding of the land's capabilities helped them adjust their operations, while Elena's analytical skills identified alternative revenue streams and cost-cutting opportunities. The success of their collaboration had not gone unnoticed beyond the boundaries of the ranch. Elena had been invited to speak at several agricultural conferences about integrating modern business practices with traditional ranch management. Jake found himself consulting with other ranch operations that were struggling to adapt to changing market conditions. "We should write a book," Elena suggested one evening as she reviewed notes from her latest speaking engagement. "There are so many operations that could benefit from what we've learned." "I'm not much of a writer," Jake replied, looking up from the equipment maintenance schedule he was updating. "You don't have to be. You know the practical side better than anyone, and I can handle the research and writing. We could call it something like Bridging the Gap, Traditional Knowledge and Modern Methods in Ranch Management." Jake considered the idea. A year ago, he would have been intimidated by the thought of contributing to a book that would be read by educated professionals across the country. Now, he understood that his knowledge was just as valuable as Elena's, simply different in its source and application. "I think we should do it," he said finally. "If it helps other operations avoid the kind of conflicts we had in the beginning, it's worth doing." Their book project became another collaboration, with Elena conducting interviews and research while Jake provided case studies and practical examples. They worked on it during the winter months when ranch operations were less demanding, often staying up late at their kitchen table surrounded by notebooks and laptop computers. The writing process revealed new dimensions of their partnership. Elena discovered that Jake had an intuitive understanding of complex systems that rivaled her formal education in business theory. Jake learned that Elena's analytical approach could reveal patterns and opportunities that were invisible to even experienced observation. "You know what's funny?" Elena said one evening as she reviewed a chapter about soil management techniques. "When I first came home, I thought the ranch needed to be modernized. Now I realize it needed to be balanced." "How do you mean?" Jake asked, looking up from his own notes about seasonal cattle health patterns. Traditional methods weren't wrong. They were developed by generations of people who understood the land and the animals better than any textbook could teach. But they were also limited by the tools and information available at the time. Modern technology and analysis don't replace traditional knowledge. They enhance it. Jake nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. It's like having a conversation between the past and the future, with the present as the bridge between them. Their personal relationship had evolved along similar lines. Elena had initially been attracted to Jake's quiet confidence and deep connection to the land. As their relationship deepened, she discovered layers of intelligence, humor, and sensitivity that had been hidden beneath his reserved exterior. Jake had been drawn to Elena's energy and determination, but he had come to value her thoughtfulness and genuine care for the people and animals on the ranch even more than her business skills. She had a way of seeing possibilities that he missed, while still respecting the wisdom embedded in established practices. They had learned to argue constructively, using their different perspectives to arrive at better solutions than either could have developed alone. When they disagreed about ranch policies or management decisions, they had developed a process for working through their differences that always resulted in better outcomes. The key is listening to understand rather than listening to respond, Elena explained to a young couple who had approached them for advice about managing their own family farm operation. When Jake disagrees with one of my ideas, I know he has a reason based on real experience. When I suggest changes to something Jake is doing, he knows I'm trying to improve something that's already working well. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it the final preparations for their wedding. Elena had chosen to hold the ceremony outdoors, with the rolling hills of the ranch serving as the backdrop. She wore her grandmother's wedding dress, altered to accommodate her more active lifestyle, while Jake wore a new black suit with his best cowboy boots. The ceremony was conducted by the minister from the small church in town, but it was witnessed by everyone who mattered to them: William Hartley, beaming with pride, the ranch hands who had become like family, Elena's college friends who were charmed by the rural setting, and Jake's relatives who had driven in from neighboring counties. Elena had written her own vows, speaking about finding home in an unexpected place and discovering that love could grow from respect, understanding, and shared purpose. Jake's vows were shorter but no less heartfelt, promising to support Elena's dreams while building a life together rooted in the land they both loved. The reception featured Maria's cooking, a local band that played everything from country classics to current hits, and dancing that continued well past midnight. At one point, Elena found herself dancing with her father while Jake spun Maria around the makeshift dance floor in the barn. "Are you happy, sweetheart?" William asked as they swayed to a slow song. "Happier than I knew was possible," Elena replied honestly. "I used to think success meant climbing corporate ladders in big cities. Now I understand that it means building something meaningful with people you care about." "Your mother would be so proud," William said, his voice thick with emotion. "She always said this ranch would be here for future generations. I just never imagined those generations would make it even better than what we built." As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Jake and Elena stood alone in the barn surrounded by the remnants of their celebration. White lights still twinkled overhead, and the scent of wildflowers lingered in the air. "So this is it," Elena said, taking Jake's hand. "We're officially partners in everything now." "Officially," Jake agreed, pulling her close. "Though it feels like we've been partners for longer than we've been married. Maybe because we've been building something together from the beginning," Elena mused. "The ranch, the relationship, our future. It's all been one continuous project." They walked out of the barn and across the yard to their home, passing the pastures where cattle rested peacefully under the stars. The ranch was quiet except for the normal sounds of night, but it hummed with the energy of a place that was thriving. In the distance, they could see the lights of the main house where William was probably reviewing the next day's schedule. Closer to their own cabin, they could hear the contented sounds of the horses in the stable and the gentle rustling of cattle settling in for the night. "You know what I love most about this place?" Elena asked as they reached their front porch. "What's that?" "Everything here serves a purpose. The land supports the animals provide for the people care for the land. It's all connected, all working together towards something bigger than any individual part." Jake considered this as he unlocked their front door. "Kind of like us." "Exactly like us," Elena said, following him inside. "We're better together than we ever were apart." Their home reflected their partnership in every detail. Elena's business books shared shelf space with Jake's collection of agricultural journals. Her computer setup occupied one end of their expanded kitchen table, while Jake's equipment maintenance logs were organized in files nearby. The walls displayed both Elena's framed college degree and photographs of prize-winning cattle that Jake had helped raise. As they prepared for bed on their wedding night, both of them felt the deep satisfaction of people who had found not just love, but purpose. Their misunderstanding about livestock rotation schedules had led them to discover something much more valuable than improved ranch efficiency. They had learned that differences in background and approach didn't have to create conflict. When approached with respect and genuine curiosity, those differences could become the foundation for innovation and growth. They had discovered that true partnership required not just love, but also trust, communication, and a shared commitment to something larger than individual desires. Do you ever think about how different things would be if that storm hadn't trapped us in the line cabin? Elena asked as they settled into bed. Sometimes, Jake replied, pulling her close. But I think we would have figured it out eventually. We were both trying to accomplish the same thing from the beginning. We just needed to learn how to listen to each other. Still, I'm grateful for that storm. It forced us to stop defending our positions long enough to understand each other's motivations. Jake kissed her forehead gently. Best storm of my life. As they drifted off to sleep in their shared home on the ranch that had brought them together, both Jake and Elena knew that their story was far from over. They had plans for expanding their operation, goals for improving sustainability practices, and dreams of raising children who would grow up understanding both the value of tradition and the importance of innovation. The ranch would continue to evolve under their joint stewardship, becoming a model for others who wanted to bridge the gap between old and new ways of doing things. Their book would help other families avoid the conflicts that had initially divided them. Their speaking engagements would spread their message that progress didn't require abandoning proven methods, just enhancing them with new tools and perspectives. But, more than any professional success, they had found something that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead, a partnership built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and the shared conviction that the best solutions emerge when different perspectives work together toward common goals. The misunderstanding that had nearly driven them apart had ultimately brought them together in ways neither could have imagined. One night in a storm-swept cabin had changed both their lives, but it was the weeks and months of patient work that followed that had truly transformed them into something neither could have become alone. As dawn approached over the Sunset Ridge Ranch, the land prepared for another day of growth, productivity, and careful stewardship under the guidance of two people who had learned that love, like successful ranch management, requires patience, understanding, and the wisdom to know when to hold fast to what works and when to embrace what might work even better.